Thank you guys for coming. I'm going to go ahead and get started, obviously, with our topic today. So feel free to keep anything you want to ask me is always, you can put it in the chat room. I love you too, Mom. and yeah, I'll try and monitor the questions while I'm going. Without further ado, let us get started on some Sauvignon Blanc. Voila. All right. Okay, you guys. So I actually really love doing these varietal workshops because I feel like it's just a great way to dive into something that you think you already know, but really there's so much more to know about everything when it comes to wine. It's so exciting. And so Sauvignon Blanc is one of those kind of topics and grape varietals that kind of everybody knows. It's similar to Pinot Noir. It's like a white wine that everybody is familiar with. And I have to say, a lot of times there's a very split party on this. There are people who love it, and then there are people who I think absolutely hate it. And what I find interesting is kind of where that split is, because I believe that there is always sometimes two camps. There's sort of like the people who really, really like that very, very pungent kind of style. And then there are people who kind of prefer that more mineral driven style. And we're going to talk about both of them because it's really about where it comes from and how it's made. And so that's what really makes it super exciting. But to get started off the bat, the fun thing about Sauvignon Blanc, the name actually comes from the French word sauvage, S-A-U-V-A-G-E, which means wild. And it was given its name essentially because this vine, this Vitis vinifera vine, basically grew rampant in Southwest France, in Central France. It grew like a weed. So basically they called it the wild vine or the wild white. It is a white grape, of course, even though it does have the green skin, but it does lend towards more of those green notes that we'll talk about. The most likely origin of Sauvignon Blanc is the Loire Valley in France, and we'll talk about that as well. But another fun thing to note is that Sauvignon Blanc is a very distinguished parent as well. Sauvignon Blanc, once upon a time, had a very lovely date with Cabernet Franc, and through that union, they produced Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc are the parent grapes of Cabernet Sauvignon. And for you Cabernet Sauvignon lovers out there, there are definitely distinctive aromatic and flavor components that are in all three of those grape varietals. The ones I'm talking about specifically are the pyrazines, that sort of green pepper. And again, we'll cover that too. So fun times. But starting off with the grape. So Sauvignon Blanc, as we discussed, of course, it is a white grape. Technically green skinned, we refer to them as white. Really the defining characteristic of Sauvignon Blanc is its aromatic qualities. This is what we refer to as an aromatic varietal. Now, how do you know if your varietal is aromatic? There's a really good way to check. I would love everyone to pick up their glasses right now. This is the important part. I didn't do this earlier, but I hope everyone has their glass ready. And if you can smell that wine pretty far away from the glass before your nose hits it, that's an aromatic wine. So it's about that, the aromas just being super prominent, really kind of jumping out of the glass and into your nose. And Sauvignon Blanc is known as one of those particular varietals. Similarly, Riesling and Gewürztraminer, if you're familiar with those guys, also very aromatic varietals. Viognier, you get that smell of like flowers, the floral, Muscat, another very aromatic varietal. All these things, they just sort of waft out at you. And so aromatic compounds, as we know, exist in the skins, and so it's part of the phenolic structure of the grape. Now, specifically Sauvignon Blanc, the aromas and the flavors are often referred to as herbaceous or tropical. It really runs the gamut on these flavor profiles, but what kind of really distinguishes it oftentimes is that green note, that grassiness, a lot of citrus, sort of citron vert kind of notes. And these green notes also sometimes, if people are big fans of Sauvignon Blanc, specifically from New Zealand, you'll get that green pepper note almost to a jalapeno quality. I remember the first time I smelled jalapeno in my Sauvignon Blanc, I was like, oh my God, what is that? It literally smelled like jalapeno. It's crazy. So these grassy green notes come from a group of aroma compounds called methoxypyrazines, or what we usually refer to as pyrazines. And I don't want to get too into it because next week, you guys, we're talking about aromas. I'm very excited about that. And we're going to get real geeky on stuff like this. But pyrazines are the same things that are found also in Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc that lend that green pepper quality to it. So it's an interesting thing. Sauvignon Blanc is bright, it's zesty, it's refreshing. It's generally drunk young. So the majority of the Sauvignon Blanc that's out there and produced is produced for immediate consumption. It's not meant to age. There are, of course, exceptions. But the interesting thing about Sauvignon Blanc is that it is a very vigorous vine. That means that it likes to grow and it grows easily. It creates a lot of green vegetation. And so that green vegetal quality can come from the ripeness of the grape as well. As we've learned, if you allow your grape to flourish, to be vigorous, then the grapes that it actually produces, sorry, the vine is vigorous, the grapes it produces tend to not be as concentrated. They tend to be more diluted and of less interesting quality for wine. So it's really important with Sauvignon Blanc as a winemaker and a vineyard manager that you are really managing those vines specifically to reduce yields and to allow for optimum sun exposure. There's a few things I'm going to talk about the nature of the grape because most of what we're spending on today is about the regions that it's grown in, but Sauvignon Blanc is basically a late butter and an early ripener. So it doesn't need a lot of heat in order to ripen. Like some grapes have longer needs, longer seasons required. Sauvignon Blanc doesn't need that much, but what it does need is cool weather because it needs to retain that acidity. So it does best in cool climates, and it needs a lot of sunshine because the sunshine, again, is what's going to give you the ripeness of the phenolics, of the skins, of the aroma compounds that are in there that are very important to Sauvignon Blanc. So what can happen though is that with Sauvignon Blanc, the perfect amount of aroma, the optimum aroma moment happens actually just before the optimum ripeness of the sugar, because the phenolics and the sugar ripen at different rates in all grapes. And in this particular case, it makes it a very tricky time for picking Sauvignon Blanc, because if you pick it too early, you get a lot of acidity, but you tend to get more of those underripe green vegetal notes in it. And if you pick it too late, then you lose a lot of the aromas and you end up with this overly kind of blousy, less acidity, kind of heavier Sauvignon Blanc that tastes a little too ripe and tropical. So while it does have a lot of versatility, picking time is really, really key. And vineyard management is super important because you want to make sure that those yields are small. And again, it's just kind of a crowd pleaser. So if you love it or hate it, my guess is you're in one of two camps, like I said, but generally speaking, you'll find a Sauvignon Blanc on most menus. If it's from, South America, if it's from New Zealand, if it's from France, anywhere, Sauvignon Blanc is a pretty easy go-to for a lot of people. Again, it's flavorful, it's quenching, it's just really, really satisfying and easy to drink. So today we're going to talk mostly about the single varietal Sauvignon Blanc. So of course, like any kind of other wine, even though it's a single varietal, meaning 100% Sauvignon Blanc in your bottle, that doesn't mean that it's not a blend. So winemakers will often still blend the same varietal from different vineyards or from different vinifications, from different fermentations, to create the blend that best expresses the kind of wine that they want to make. And when they're doing that, there's a few different things they can do with Sauvignon Blanc to kind of enhance it in the winery. Skin contact is very common with Sauvignon Blanc and aromatic varietals in general. That means that kind of maceration where before fermentation takes place, the skins are allowed to sort of soak in the grape juice. And that starts to extract more concentration of those phenolic compounds, those aroma compounds into the wine, and kind of enhancing it without losing any kind of acidity. Also, there's something called lees aging. So if you're not familiar with this concept, lees is the name for the yeast cells that have died after fermenting the sugar into alcohol and fallen down to the bottom of your fermentation vat, be it a barrel or stainless steel. Now, if you allow your fermented juice to stay in contact with those yeast cells, what happens is they start to break down and they actually add a textural complexity to the mouthfeel of the wine. And this is in any wine. This is in no matter what you're making, whatever the grape varietal, they all create lees, and that can always be a part of winemaking, but you'll see it a lot of times in white wines, especially sort of lighter aromatic white wines, because it does help to add a little bit of dimension and complexity to the palate of the wine. So lees aging is very common also with Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is, we're not going to talk about this as much, but it's typically a very popular blending partner, in particular in Bordeaux in France, where some people think that it is from. There, it's blended with the main white varietal, which is Sauvignon. And a lot of times these are very structured, very complementary varietals. Sauvignon tends to have kind of like a lovely waxy peachy note, and the acidity and structure of Sauvignon Blanc works really well with that when you're creating a bottled wine, especially when they're youthful, but then they also have more of an aging potential with the two combined. And then in Spain as well, the region of Rueda, which is known for Verdejo. And interestingly enough, Verdejo and Sauvignon Blanc have very similar flavor profiles. It's not quite as aromatic as Sauvignon Blancs can be, but they complement each other very nicely. So you get this bright citrus, kind of refreshing, quenching wine from Rueda. And interestingly enough, the Sauvignon Blanc wasn't really introduced there until the 1980s, which is kind of when Sauvignon Blanc took off. This was the New Zealand expression that we'll talk about, really boosted Sauvignon Blanc on the global market. So it started getting planted in different places like Rueda, and they found that by adding Sauvignon Blanc to their wines and putting it on the label, they were able to reach a wider consumer base because people knew Sauvignon Blanc, but they didn't know Verdejo. So I encourage you, if you don't know Verdejo and you like Sauvignon Blanc, go out and find some Rueda wine. You'll really, really like it. Guaranteed. It's wonderful. So another thing that is not super common with Sauvignon Blanc is oak aging. You will see some neutral oak fermentation, but generally speaking, we know that using oak in any capacity can definitely influence the aroma and texture of a wine. It tends to kind of add a little bit more oxygen to the wine during any sort of fermentation or aging process, which can sort of add complexity, but can also kind of diminish sometimes your aromas. In particular though, what oak aging really does, especially new oak aging, which is not as common, it can mask some of those fresh fruity flavors that you get with Sauvignon Blanc. So it is a really, really wonderful option if that's what you're going for. But typically you won't see a whole lot of new oak aging on Sauvignon Blancs anywhere, except maybe sometimes in California, which we will also get into as well. And lastly, dessert wines. And this is really going back to Bordeaux as well. So Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc make up the main components of a really beautiful, very, very age-worthy dessert wine called Sauternes. I certainly hope you all at some point get a chance to enjoy Sauternes. It is an absolutely exquisite and delicious wine. It's very, very challenging to make. A great topic for a whole nother webinar. But really, really one of the most important wines that Sauvignon Blanc takes part in. Okay, so now really what I want to focus on is where does Sauvignon Blanc come from? And of course, Sauvignon Blanc is pretty much all over the world right now, but it does have some main areas. And by kind of learning about these main areas, it also gives you an idea as to what style to expect from which region. Because I do hear a lot where people understandably think that a varietal is the same. You think that if you order a Sauvignon Blanc, you know what you're going to get. But as anyone who has had very, very wide-ranging or different styles, they can be very different on the palate and in general. But knowing where they come from can be very helpful to finding your favorite style. So one of the main things, probably the most important region that we'll find Sauvignon Blanc, is the Loire Valley in France. This is kind of considered the motherland. It's been grown there for a very, very long time, and wine has been made there from Sauvignon Blanc for a very long time. Most specifically is the smaller region of Sancerre. And Sancerre exists, the whole Loire Valley is a much cooler wine growing region, so it's benefiting from the cool climate to retain that acidity. But Sancerre is known specifically because we're talking about France, we have to talk about terroir. And the soils of Sancerre really give a lot of important characteristics to these wines. And they're very, very specific about it. For those who aren't as familiar, you may not have known that when you drank a Sancerre, you were drinking Sauvignon Blanc. But as it turns out, that is the main grape of the region of Sancerre. And the way that the French talk about their wines, they don't put the grape name on their labels. They always label by the region in which it's made, because they find that that's the best way for them to communicate the individualistic expression of a grape based on where it's grown. So henceforth, if you see a Sancerre on a menu or in the store, you will know that Sancerre is the equivalent of Sauvignon Blanc because that is the grape that they use in that region. So I hope that makes sense. If not, text me afterwards and we can totally have a talk about it. But so Sancerre has a really important famous soil called Kimmeridgian soils. And Kimmeridgian is basically this little sea creature, shellfish, that eons and eons and eons, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, basically lived and died, and then created this limestone layer with these little sea creatures in it. And this limestone, this calcium-rich limestone, is really definitive for creating wines that have lots of acidity, lots of minerality, and lots of that structural sort of verviness, if you will. So if those are the type of wines you like, looking for limestone soils will definitely lead you to them. In particular, Sancerre's Kimmeridgian soils are also sort of subcategorized into other soils that are part of it. And I have them listed here. In particular, these three soil types are used by winemakers to sort of blend across, because each of the different soils will create a different profile. For example, that Terre Blanche, that has a lot of those oyster fossils in it, gets a lot of acidity for the wines. The Silex is a really important one. It's actually a flint. And sometimes you can almost catch a whiff and a flavor profile of like a smoky quality for grapes that are grown on the Silex. Altogether, each of them create very different expressions. It's really awesome to go there trying wines from grapes that were grown on each of the different soils, because you can taste distinct differences. It's very cool. Nearby Sancerre is a region called Pouilly-Fumé. This is probably your second most important Sauvignon Blanc region of Loire Valley. As it turns out, they are also focused on Sauvignon Blanc, but the fumé, which does mean smoke in French, is not referencing necessarily a smoky quality to all the wines, but as a way to differentiate by name the other white grape that they grow there, which is Chasselas. And for whatever reason, Sauvignon Blanc is known as Fumé Blanc de Pouilly, or Blanc Fumé de Pouilly. So that was basically what kind of gave the region its name, but all of the soils there are very similar in composition to Sancerre, and it also produces equally sort of as concentrated, rich and exciting Sauvignon Blancs. So if you like that style, that mineral-driven sort of complex style, Loire Valley, Sancerre, Pouilly-Fumé are your friends. Now, even better are the other sort of satellite areas, because you'll find great value there for a similar kind of wine. And these are Concy, Menetou-Sellon, and Rouy. Concy is going to give you a little bit more of that tropical gooseberry note, if you do kind of like that more pungent quality. But the Rouy and Menetou-Sellon Sauvignon Blancs, very similar in structure to Sancerre, probably at about half the price level. So if you do like Sancerre's, check it out for the Rouys and Menetou-Sellons in your shop or online. The Touraine is actually the region that's sort of the middle Loire. These are also spectacular values for Sauvignon Blanc. And it'll be called Touraine Blanc, and it will be Sauvignon Blanc. These are slightly different. They have a really cool soil there called tuffeau. We're still in the limestone chalky category, the chalk limestone, but this is actually a chalk that's very soft. And it was the basis for a lot of caves all along the Loire River in this middle Loire area. They basically were able to carve out ancient history, caves for dwelling in, and then also essentially for keeping their wine in. So this tuffeau soil is a very, very interesting calcium-rich soil that also produces incredibly sort of structured wines with great acidity. So if that's the kind of wine you like, Touraine Blancs, great value. So moving on, of course, arguably the modern home of Sauvignon Blanc is New Zealand. And as you can see, Marlborough in particular contains about 90% of all of the Sauvignon Blanc plantings in New Zealand, which is significant. It is their top export for sure. And really, these wines are the ones that are known for being very pungent and very aromatic. Some of you, you've heard me mention gooseberry a couple times. I wanted to say that the gooseberry is sometimes a euphemism for something else, which is used to describe New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. That is cat pee. So this is where we're talking about these very, very pungent, very, very strong aromas that can come out from New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. And this will range absolutely from those very, very green gauge notes, from that super citrus, that super, super grassy note, jalapeno pepper, all the way to that kind of super tropical passion fruit, white peach, nectarine kind of realm as well. And again, you have an intensity of and concentration of flavor and aroma from New Zealand because of the climate and the terroir again. So what is it about New Zealand and Marlborough in particular? Marlborough in particular is a maritime climate. It's a cool climate. You're really pretty cool down there in New Zealand. People don't think of it that much, but it's really far south there. On the South Island, Central Otago is the southernmost wine growing region in the world. They grow Pinot Noir. Marlborough is not that far northern from that in the latitude, but you have a really cool climate and really, really sunny days again. This is part of the sunniest region of New Zealand. So by creating the yield management, they're able to really get a lot of concentration of flavor and aroma in their Sauvignon Blanc grapes. Now it's super interesting because grapes weren't even planted, the Sauvignon Blanc grape wasn't even planted in New Zealand until 1973. And the expansion of that was really limited because it was experimental. They didn't know how it was gonna do. It was really wild, it was growing very fortuitously. It took a lot of understanding, again, of that vine training to minimize the yields, to create the quality fruit. And the first one, I saw someone was drinking one of them, but the first wine to come out of New Zealand, Marlborough, New Zealand, Sauvignon Blanc, was Cloudy Bay. And this was in 1985 that really put Sauvignon Blanc on the map. And this was your pungent, your very aromatic, your very, very distinct style of Sauvignon Blanc that basically took the world by storm and has been a benchmark for Sauvignon Blancs everywhere. Either to be just like it or to not. So this is really what most Sauvignon Blancs are referring to when they're making their own blends. The interesting thing about Sauvignon Blanc, and of course the interesting thing about fame in New Zealand, this became very popular very quickly. And so there was a mad, mad rush to create the supply for the demand. Plantings, it's not a very large area, to be honest. It's very, very hilly. And there's not what they would consider a whole lot of plantable areas, but between 2001 and 2010, literally every inch of land that could be planted to vines was planted to vines. It basically tenfold the amount of vines that were planted in that decade. And of course, with that kind of expansion, you're gonna run into a lot of quality disparity. So this is essentially what hurt Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, I think, overall, was that you had a really great product, a really unique product that was then copied and capitalized on, and the market was flooded with a lot of lower quality versions that were not paying attention to quality, but were really focused more on that quantity. And that made it more difficult and challenging for the consumer to be able to identify the good quality ones. Ultimately, you didn't know if you were gonna open a bottle of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and smell kitty litter or what. But the truth of the matter is that if you do pick the correct producers and you understand that they are working on quality versus quantity, generally you're gonna see a higher price point on those, but it will be worth it because it will give you that concentration and the really, really beautiful expectations of lovely, lovely aromatic Sauvignon Blancs from Marlborough. I bring up California because those of us who live here know that if you have a favorite winery in Napa or Sonoma, or anywhere really, they're probably making a Sauvignon Blanc. It is by far and away not the most popular grape of California. That would be Cabernet Sauvignon. In particular, Napa Valley, 51% of Napa is Cabernet Sauvignon, 9% is Merlot. And then right after that, you've got Sauvignon Blanc at about 6%. So not a whole lot, but still the second most planted white grape that you'll find in California. So pretty popular. The tricky part about California Sauvignon Blanc. So if you live here, you are familiar that we are a warmer climate. And even if you don't live here, you know that we're a warmer climate. But even by comparison, when we're talking about these Loire Valley and Marlborough, New Zealand, these are cool climates that are ideal for Sauvignon Blanc. California climate is not ideal. When you get hot weather, you end up with Sauvignon Blanc grapes that get overripe, that lose acidity and create these flabby, heavy, sort of almost oily kind of wines that aren't really refreshing or pleasant to drink, kind of the opposite of what you expect from Sauvignon Blanc. So you have to be very, very critical of choosing cool regions within California to get your Sauvignon Blanc from. Additionally, a tricky moment, like I talked about with the picking of Sauvignon Blanc, when you're in a hot climate like this, you have to be very, very careful about your acidity. So sometimes grape growers will pick grapes early in order to retain acidity. But then what happens with Sauvignon Blanc is you suddenly lose the aromatic potential for it. So you haven't been able to reach all of those beautiful florals and citrus notes and passion fruit notes. And you end up with kind of a mediocre, blah, water tasting, watered down kind of wine, which isn't really satisfying either. So this has been the challenge for most California winemakers when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc, but you can still find really great examples from cooler regions. Anderson Valley is a great example. Dry Creek up there in Napa and Sonoma. Lake County, which is actually just south, is near the Sierras, but they're actually a beautiful little microclimate of, I shouldn't say microclimate, but a smaller area that has great, great cool weather. Clear Lake in particular, it's a giant lake there that really mitigates the temperature and allows the region to produce really satisfying, citrusy, great acidity in their Sauvignon Blancs, usually for a great value price because, I mean, who's heard of Clear Lake AVA? Probably not a lot of people, but they're really, really great values and really delicious wines to find. And of course, I have to talk about Fumé Blanc. So has anyone here ever drank Fumé Blanc? I'm just curious. Has everyone heard the term? So this is a fun one. So the term Fumé Blanc was invented by Robert Mondavi in the 1970s. This was when Sauvignon Blanc was not so popular and he was trying to sell it. And so he decided he would give it a name that sort of referred to the French region of Pouilly-Fumé in particular, and lend a certain elegance to it via its name. But the way that he made it was not referential to the French style at all. It was actually a way of making Sauvignon Blanc, and he used new oak aging. And then he also put a dark green Bordeaux bottle. Those are the skinny bottles, which is not typical for Sauvignon Blanc. So in name only was it referencing the French style. In actuality, it was a much, much different style. It had that sort of rich, heavier texture, those notes of vanilla and kind of smokiness from the new oak. And as it turns out, it was wildly popular at the time. So it became a very common name. It was a great marketing ploy by Robert Mondavi. It worked well to his benefit. And to this day, you can still see that referenced internationally in New World wines. The funny part about it, of course, is that Fumé Blanc as a term has no legal meaning. So it can be actually any white wine. It doesn't even have to be Sauvignon Blanc to be a Fumé Blanc, but there's just no way of knowing. That's the beauty of the new world. It's the wild, wild west out here. South America, I want to bring this up because, of course, it's closer to us, but it also has a pretty significant production of Sauvignon Blanc, in particular Chile. That's what I'm focusing on. And in particular in Chile, we're talking about the cooler coastal regions. These guys, so if you can see here, I'm going to use my little pointer. This is pretty fun. So over here, we've got obviously the Pacific Ocean, but Chile is very similar to our Central Coast in California. There's a lot of these east-west valleys here. As you can see, the names are all the names of valleys. And these east-west valleys do the same thing like in Santa Barbara, where they pull in that cool air from the Pacific. And that allows for the right kind of climate for cool climate grapes to retain their acidity. And in particular, what we call on the coast, which in Chile they refer to as the Costa region. So they have 3 different designations for their wine in Chile. Costa, which is wines that are from along the coast. Entre Cordillera, which is this central part. Entre Cordillera means between the mountains, essentially, because over here, which is their 3rd designation, is the Andes. So the coastal regions, or the Costa regions as they're referred to in Chile, these are where you're finding your good, cool climate, great acidity wines. Some ones in particular from Chile that we'll refer to, of course, are the Casablanca Valley, which is probably the most important. That's this one that's right over here. You can see where it's listed. Just below that is Leda Valley as well. And then further north, you see Elqui Valley and Limarí Valley. And these, again, you're just getting that cool climate. You're getting that retained acidity, which is super important. Also further south, the Biobío Valley. It's a kind of an up and coming region for Sauvignon Blanc from Chile. Most Sauvignon Blanc currently is planted in the Central Valley, which unfortunately is very similar to California's Central Valley, meaning that it's hot. So you're not going to quite find as delicious quality Sauvignon Blancs from the Central Valley, but you will find a lot of wine from there, as it turns out. And then of course, Austria, right, you guys? This is my favorite actually, and I'm so excited about this because I sometimes forget too, but a lot of people don't know about Austria in particular as a really, really wonderful region for Sauvignon Blanc. And the white grape that it's best known for is Gruner Veltliner. Also a spectacular grape if you like high acid dry white wines. But in particular, when you get into southern Austria in Styria, that's this area that's right down here. It actually borders Slovenia, and there's a lot of vineyards that cross over the border because that border has become very liquid over many, many years. But the this particular area, Styria, or Steiermark as it's referred to in Austria, and in particular, this guy right down here, Südsteiermark. This is your region for top quality Sauvignon Blanc from Austria. What I love about the Südsteiermark Sauvignon Blancs is they create a perfect kind of combination of both that mineral-driven Loire Valley style and some of those more pungent tropical fruits that you get from New Zealand. So they capture the aromatics beautifully. The volcanic soils there are really great for adding an intense minerality, almost a smoky quality to it, but they have a lot of tension and just a lot of character and a lot of complexity to them. They're not cheap, unfortunately. They tend to be a bit more expensive just because we don't get them exported, or I should say imported, quite as much here. So if you do find them, they might be a little bit pricier, but I highly encourage you to give them a shot. They just really have a wonderful, just exciting kind of verviness to them that I use that word a lot, but it's because I like it. Some food pairings. I mean, the thing that we're going to talk about with Sauvignon Blanc, as you're just smelling this, I mean, you just get it at summertime. Right, you have that the sort of citrus, the acidity and the concentration means that it is going to cover a lot of intense foods. Right, you have to match your intensities with food pairings. So the those vinaigrettes, those dressings, those sour qualities, it's great with Thai foods and spices. It just kind of covers those beautiful gamuts. The classic pairing in particular with Sancerre or the Loire Valley Sauvignon Blancs is goat cheese. And fresh goat cheese. And specific from that region, there's actually, Chavignon is a little town just outside of Sancerre, and that they are known for their specific goat cheese there. And it's the idea of that super fresh tang, that grassy tang from fresh goat cheese is kind of the exact complement to what's in your glass whenever you're drinking Sancerre, so, or a Sauvignon Blanc from that region in particular. So it's really fun to know that and then also be able to try it. So next time you have a cheese tray, grab some Sauvignon Blanc, you know, and all that good stuff. So, okay, cheers guys. That is my little spiel on Sauvignon Blanc. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. At this point, I would certainly be happy to take any questions if anyone has any. If you don't, that's totally fine. I want to thank you all so much for coming. I also just want to say too, I am drinking the Le Carasson by Hubert Brochard. I don't know if you can see that. So Hubert Brochard is actually a Sancerre producer. So I am drinking a basically declassified Sancerre because I really like it. I like all the Sauvignon Blanc. Like I'm totally into the New Zealands too as well. I kind of run the gamut. And I have a certain affinity towards really intense flavors. So this New Zealand works great for me, but I also, my heart is always with anything that's minerally and bright. Have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful week. I will see you all next week, and happy Mother's Day to all you mothers out there again. All right. Take care, everybody. Cheers.